Yeah. Hi everybody, my name's Rhiannon. I teach in MIB and I mostly teach critical management theory. So I'm very passionate about critical thinking. I do a lot on trying to teach students to think critically in my courses. And it's something which I've been thinking a lot about, particularly in the past year as I come up to teaching my course again next semester. So hopefully some of the things that I'm thinking about will come through here. I know that these are hopefully going to be online, so there are a few example slides which we're going to kind of skip over, but you should be able to see them if you go online and look at the slides through there. So the agenda then, very quickly, critical thinking in the graduate profile, so how we're understanding critical thinking for this particular session is based on how the graduate profile understands and defines critical thinking. Then we'll look at what it isn't, because I think there can often be a misunderstanding with students in particular about what critical means, and then what gets in the way, and some techniques that I've been using throughout my classes as well. So here is the critical thinking sort of definition that comes from the graduate profile. So overall then, the graduate's expected to be able to contest knowledge and practice, to be able to critically consider ideas and texts and research, and to think reflectively and reflexively. And then across from that rubric that you've got just before the break, across the stages, there is a development or there's a progress in critical thinking. I teach mostly postgraduates and stage 3 students, and so I'm going to be focusing much of my attention in the techniques around stage 3, which is when we're really getting to challenging, getting students to challenge ideas, to test assumptions, and to also take multiple perspectives and have logical and coherent critiques. So this is what I'll be speaking to today. So what isn't critical thinking? Critical thinking isn't just about being negative. My students say, oh, I just need to be more negative. I say, no, that's not what I want you to do. It's not about me standing up there whinging. I think a lot of my students think that I'm just up there whinging and being anti-business with my negative critical management stuff. And I'm not trying to whinge, and I'm not against businesses. And then when I ask in their written work, can you be more critical, please? Can you give me more depth of analysis? And I come back with a longer list of cons. A longer list of evaluation points. And I'm like, well, that's not quite critical thinking either. And it's not about being privileged, or from up here I can look down and see what's wrong with it. It's not about saying, I'm in my ivory tower, and when I look at those little organizations beneath me, I can see all sorts of problems. It's not about that kind of criticality. It's not about being mean or negative. Particularly from a critical management perspective, which is the perspective I'm bringing here, it's about empowering students to be able to create their own understandings and their own meanings around what's going on in the world. It's about allowing them to make assumptions, ideologies, and falsities explicit so they can see them. Because quite often those things hide under the surface of what they're doing. And if we can make social structures and control and power explicit, then we give them a chance to see what's really going on. And in critical management studies in particular, we want to emancipate them from ideologies that are constraining their thinking, from assumptions that are actually dangerous to society. Things around gender and diversity. What assumptions underpin unconscious biases? And if we can see those biases, then we're in a much better place to resist them and to challenge them. So I'm not whinging, I'm not hating on business. I'm saying in business and in organizations that you're in, there's other things going on. There's informal expectations, there's social structures, there's issue around power. Let's try and pick them out and look at them and examine them and understand why they're there and how we can go about resisting those and pushing them. So that's what critical thinking is. But what gets in the way when we're teaching critical thinking? Well, the one thing that gets in the way of me is quite often me. I get in my own way constantly. Particularly if I see teaching as heroic. So I think if we want to teach critical thinking properly, then we need to think about what we are in the classroom and what we represent. So I've got some really nice quotes here that hopefully show you my thinking here, that a student's dependence on authority figures is a diversion from the skills that they really require, the skills that we defined in the graduate profile under critical thinking. If we want students to listen and to respect multiple and diverse perspectives, then we can't be consistently and constantly privileging our own ideas in the classroom. Because that's saying you should listen to me, I have authority. So if we're going to teach critical thinking, then we probably need to stop talking. And we probably need to say, my ideas and my opinions as an academic and as a researcher in this field come from me and what I've done, but you are open to challenge that. I'm open to criticism and I'm open to critique, as long as it's done in an informed way and we can have a conversation about it. So I think with critical thinking, what often gets in the way is this expectation that we might put on ourselves to be heroic and self-reliant in the classroom. And so when I'm looking at techniques, I keep this quote in mind. I committed to being in a classroom in a different way. I didn't want to be the font of knowledge. Because if you're the font of knowledge, you might get more defensive over the knowledge that you are providing and giving in that class. So that's sort of the setup that I wanted to do before we go into the kind of techniques that I use, because this is where I'm coming from when I create these techniques. And so one key thing that I try and get my students to work with is sense making, making sense of things that are occurring in their lives. And this means avoiding what you might call the harmony model of teaching. And the harmony model is where we say, I want everyone to sit in a room and be happy, and we'll all pat each other on the back and tell us everybody's idea is interesting, and we'll come to one conclusion, one harmonious conclusion about what this topic is, or what we think of this topic. And what that means is that we try and all agree with each other, and we don't need to do that. We don't need to all agree with each other. We can actually disagree in a really useful and generative way. So I want to support our students in their critical thinking by legitimating doubt, by permitting difference, and most importantly for me, encouraging the assertion of ideas against resistance. About saying, look, if you have an idea, let's really spend some time picking it apart and understanding it. You are permitted to push your idea. Don't just give it to me, but push it. As long as these are well informed. I have a hatred of what I call opinion facts, which are people who have such strong opinions that they've decided that it's fact and it's real. And I will destroy that if I see it, because they frustrate me. If you have something and you want to push it, then I hope it comes from a place of education, not ignorance. And so in designing activities then, I try and design activities that allow students to sense make, or make sense of the world. And I think this links as well into what we're seeing in the future of work. So I'm on the MIB task force looking at the future of work, and I've been doing a lot of work around this. And quite often, the discourse and the rhetoric around the future of work is around volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This is what students are starting to think they're coming into. I've asked students, what is your future like? And unstable, unknown, constantly changing. And so what I want to do then is to give them the skills to make sense of this constantly shifting, scary place that they think they might be moving into. So I can't tell them exactly how to manage the future of work, but I can help them make sense of what they're going to come across. And to do that then, I want to create activities where they can explore a wider system and they can gather data. That's part of critical thinking, is gathering information and data. That they can pursue opinions that differ from their own by listening to others and asking others. So that's really about listening and testing their assumptions. So once you've listened, trying to do something active, trying out what you've got, seeing if it works, maybe changing yourself by adopting a different perspective, or reflecting on what didn't work and trying again. And I've got an example of something that MIB does in a course, it's GLMI 708. It's a course about creative, strategic, and critical thinking. So it's a course focused on thinking. And they got the army in, and the army said, I've got this big problem, and it was a problem around diversity. Now the students don't learn anything about diversity, they learn about how to think. So they're given readings about thinking critically, how to be creative, how to gather ideas, and they go away and they undertake their own research in the area of diversity. So they're making sense of the domain, and they're bringing in information and data and making sense of that. But going out and attempting these things is a bit scary, and there's risk involved. If you're not given a very, very clear plan of what you need to do, then you're always risking doing it wrong. There's always a risk that you haven't understood. And so we give free formative feedback at certain points to reduce that risk, so they can feel like they're on track, or we can say, oh, maybe you want to go this way. We pivot them or divert them. And at the end, the students learn to be open to the unknown, and they're much more able to navigate their own sense-making as they come across something that they don't understand. And in this particular course, they then went into a room together and wrote a full book in a day. So teams wrote chapters, and then the book got edited and published, and they left the course with a book, an actual book that they'd written, and the book went to the client as well. So this is a big change, but it's an example of all these different elements of sense-making which are necessary for critical thinking coming together. What this can lead to in classrooms is something that I put a positive spin on, called constructive unease. You might hear it as generative resistance. It's about the positivity that comes from a bit of discomfort. The harmony model is nice and comfortable and cozy. We're all coming together and agreeing how lovely. Disagreement is a bit uncomfortable. It can be awkward. So when we're trying to look at ways to get students to think critically and to be in the space where they're able to do the things that we need them to do to think that way, we're acknowledging doubt, we're acknowledging friction, we're allowing critique. These aren't noises to be averted. They're actually things that can enhance the imagination of our students. And if we allow and permit doubt and difference, it can actually be very energetic. The interactions when students realize that they can say what they want to say and defend it can lead to a lot of movement in their thinking, a lot of energy. But you need to set them up for it. They need to be ready and know that it is safe to do this kind of thinking and this kind of interaction. And this takes time, but there's a few things that I do. So there's one thing that I do with my postgrads. And we do a course called Working in an Age of Uncertainty, and I'm going to take you through the first 2 slides I give them in the introductory class that we do. So what I'd like you to do, please, is cross your arms. Great. What I'd like you to do now is to fully cross them the other way. Fully. Tuck. Yeah? Okay. So the first time you crossed your arm, it was very, very quiet. It was very quiet. It's what we might call a reflex interaction. So if I have a discussion group and I ask a question to the class, somebody puts their hand up, says something to me, and they're done and they're out. It was probably a very comfortable comment. It was probably a comment that the whole class had in their head, but one person was able to say it. It was just a reflex to the question that I posed. When you crossed your arm the second time, was it more uncomfortable? Did it feel a bit wrong? Yeah? When I do that with students and a little bit with you guys, there's an immediate murmur. People start talking. You know why they start talking? Because they go into analysis mode. They immediately go, this is uncomfortable, why is it uncomfortable? Is it uncomfortable for you too? You uncomfortable? Why are you uncomfortable? If I'm uncomfortable, why are you uncomfortable? Maybe I'm weird. And through that discomfort, and this is what I tell students, this reflective dialogue of trying to figure out why am I different, why are you different, what's going on, is allowing them to learn. And it's through discomfort that they start to speak and try and understand what's going on. This is a really physical example to the students and saying, you're uncomfortable, and as soon as you're uncomfortable, you started talking and trying to understand why. And so that sets them up to say, it's okay to be uncomfortable, because if you're uncomfortable, you're trying to figure out why and what's going on. And usually after that exercise, they're a lot chattier, because they know what I want from them. There are other things. Obviously, these slides are available to you. You can, if you want, take them through a critical thinking model. I don't tend to do this, but there's a site there if you want to look at some flow charts. Just to get them to really understand what you mean by critical, so they don't think that it's being negative all the time. I've also given some examples of setup slides here, which I've got a few that I'll stop at. Not that one. This one, I kind of tell them, the class that we've got is a sort of a pursuit of being in the class. You're not having a lecture, you're learning and you're in a lecture situation. And in particular, this last section is saying, you can challenge me. I'm very open to being challenged. If you don't agree with me, let's stop and let's explore that. So this is a slide from the third stage 3 paper. This is a quote I give them and I ask them to think about it and talk to each other about it. In particular, never be a spectator of unfairness or stupidity. And I ask them if they've ever been a spectator of unfairness and stupidity. It doesn't take long before they start talking. Another few quotes. Sometimes it's nice to ask them if there are any taken for granted theories that they think they want to unpick or they've never really believed but felt like they should believe. And in the slides that you'll be able to get online, you've got all my teaching notes underneath of stories that I think they're going to come up with, like happy workers are more productive workers. You know, these kind of really taken for granted assumptions around organizations that we can be critical of. What else? Yeah, so those are just some of the first slides. I've taken them from a range of courses, so you're welcome to have a look at them. All traditions and interventions, can you think of any other taken for granted theories? So in the classroom then, what I'm really looking at is using examples, often something kind of juicy, using multimedia, something that might kind of poke and prod them and make them a bit uncomfortable maybe. And then giving them the support they might need in assignments to gather information and data and be fluent in how to use that. A lot of this takes time, so you can't teach as much content. When I revisited my stage 3 slides to put in more critical thinking, I had to take out quite a bit of content, and that was painful. That was painful for me because as an academic I like content. I think it's all very, very important. How can I possibly delete any of these slides? And I just had to kind of create a new version and then delete away in order to put in space for conversation, put in space for encouraging. That's a really good question. Why did you ask that question? Why do you think the answer is that? So I'm very explicitly asking students to do things for me. I'm very explicitly asking them to think in a particular way, and I'm very explicitly asking them to debate something. And then finally, I've got another example from the stage 3 class where I teach food. So I teach the use of food in organizations, and what is the role of food? And it's a great way of progressing them through critical thinking. So the first thing I do is give them something easy, evaluation. Why might Google offer this free food? And I just get them to talk about why would Google give free food. It's really easy. I just reflex interaction at that point. That's all I want from them. Just want them to hear their voices in the space that we're in. So evaluation. Then about 10-15 minutes later, analysis. So now you've got used to talking. I want you to analyze these memes and tell me, or memes. I think it's funny when I say memes. Analyze these memes and tell me what they mean to you. Have you ever experienced them? So we've got things here about pressure to eat if there's cake, and what that means for body image. The fact that it's free but it's not very good. I think this university, I've never seen a business school purchase more pizza in my life. But when it's there, I have a slice in my hand. I didn't even know I got it. Somehow it's in my hand. So what happened there? So these are those, and we can add theory to this. They don't know I'm going to do it. It's like sneaking broccoli into cheese. I'm going to add theory and they just don't know yet. So we analyze it and we bring in the readings. And then about 15-20 minutes later, we've got a little bit more, we've got our analysis out of the way. We do critical. So I give them a video. And we take them through, should organizations be doing this? What are the pros and cons? Is lunchtime free time or managed time? So if you're given lunch, you're still in the office. If you're told that you need to eat healthy, is that an organization telling you how your body should look? What's happening to your identity as you're eating cake with your colleagues? So we start to go under. Does the receiver owe the company anything? Is it reciprocal then? Or because the company gave me free cake, I owe them an extra hour of overtime? So we're getting critical. So we've gone through easy, reflex interaction, analysis, sneaking some theory in, to let's really pull this apart and see what's going on underneath. And by this point, they're warmed up and they're ready to deal with this sort of complexity. And at this point, they're also ready to be pushed. And they're ready to be challenged, and they're ready to be poked and prodded, and they're ready to defend themselves because they've done so much thinking already that they feel confident that they can defend themselves. And so the final point I wanted to make, because I think I'm just out of time, is Winston Churchill. When he lost Singapore to the Japanese, it was one of the biggest failures he considered, and he asked himself these 4 questions. Why didn't I know? Why wasn't I told? Why didn't I ask? And why didn't I tell what I knew? And usually once my students have got halfway through the course and I'm asking them to do something reflective, and I want them to be thinking critically, and I want them to be making sense of what's going on, these are the 4 questions I pose to them. If something hasn't quite gone your way in this course so far, these are the questions that will trigger their sense-making and will allow them to think, okay, what was going on? What information should I have got? Why didn't I try and get it? So I find these questions to be really useful in helping students think, what should I be asking myself as I move forward and try to develop my critical thinking skills? So thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Rhiannon, I was really impressed by your talk, and I think some brilliant ideas you shared. All these discussions which are happening, how do you assess in their learning? Like, how did the assessment happen actually?
So we've done a few different assessments. So recently with the postgraduate course, we've actually said to them, we do mini seminars. So we say, what we want you to do is critically engage with a topic and teach the rest of the class that topic, or something interesting about that topic. And so they have to go away and gather information. So we give them a reading set and say, so find something interesting in that reading and do a 20-minute seminar for the rest of the class on it as a group. And so they have to go through these sense-making steps. So they have to go through and collect information. They have to figure out what's important in this information, what are the different perspectives that I need to consider in this seminar. And then we have quite a detailed rubric of what we expect them to be able to deliver in that seminar. But it is tricky because you're giving them space. Sorry.
Then it becomes really tricky because then are we assessing their communication skills? Because how exactly they are expressing that to the class? Or we are looking at the content of it? Or we are looking at both of those things?
I mean, with any type of assessment, there's always an element of communication because they have to communicate what they've learned. So whether it's a seminar, an essay, video, they're always communicating. So their communication has to be good. And we are recognizant, I think, is the best way to say it, of the novelty and ambiguity around the assessments we set. But we also spend quite a bit of time constructing the rubrics, and we make sure the students know those rubrics. So it actually means that when we set assessments, we give them the rubrics and we talk through it. We do posters as well, where we say go away and construct a poster out of something that you think is most critical in organizations, and create a poster. But because you're not giving them, do this, and this, we've had to really kind of sit back and go, what are our rubrics going to look like? Yeah, it's a very good question. Any other questions? No? Okay, well good then. Thank you very much.